There are so many movies that are hyped up every year, and then there are movies even above that with even crazier hype, with unbelievable expectations set by the fans. And some movies fail to live up to those crazy high expectations, but then there are very select few movies that even reach those crazy high expectations and sometimes even go further beyond those expectations to deliver us a masterpiece. And those are the movies I'm going to be talking about today. So the least you can do is hit that subscribe button, because I will be making a part 2 to this video where I talk about movies that didn't live up to the expectations. But let's talk about the movies that did the impossible and lived up to these crazy expectations. Starting off with the movie that lived up to some crazy expectations, Across the Spiderverse. Now this came out last year, and to me it still doesn't feel real how amazing it did and how unbelievably good this movie was. The first one changed animated movies forever. There are so many new animated movies that take very much a lot of inspiration from the first one, and we didn't know too sure if we're going to get the second one because it was a while till we got the second one. But when they announced it and we got the trailer, the expectations were crazy high. To live up to a movie that changed animated universe and one of the first movies that started the whole entire multiverse thing that all these big cinema franchises are doing. So to live up to these crazy expectations of being the sequel to that movie was pretty crazy. The trailer was pretty good, but even I doubted it could live up to being as amazing as the first one. And then it came out. The hype was real. I entered the theater and it surpassed my expectations. And it surpassed expectations for a lot of people. It is one of the highest rated IMDb movies of all time. The cast was amazing. The music was amazing. The action was amazing. The animation was amazing. Everything in this movie was amazing. 10 out of 10, a masterpiece movie. And that's because this movie isn't even complete. It still needs a sequel to finish this whole entire franchise. And hopefully from the track record of all these Spider-Verse movies, it seems like the third one might be the best one. It set up so many plot lines that are yet to be finished, and there's so many stuff I want to see concluded that I can't wait for the third one to come out. Hopefully that third one comes out in my lifetime, because it seems like it's been delayed for a lot because of the writer's strike. But when this movie comes out, I think it might go down as one of the best trilogies, not animated trilogies, but just trilogies in general of all time. And I'm glad to be witnessing an iconic trilogy in the making, and it definitely will change the landscape of animated movies and the potential to how good an animated movie can be in Hollywood. The next one we're talking about is The Batman. At this point, when The Batman was coming out, comic movies were kind of getting a little bit unserious. Obviously, we had MCU being at its highest point, and most comic book movies and most movies in general were a little unserious. Like, people were telling jokes in some serious moments. That's when we got memes that Marvel movies were like Disney movies. And even the DCU was a bit unserious when we got the Justice League movie. So comic book movies were a bit unserious at this point. We hadn't seen a very serious movie since The Dark Knight and since The Dark Knight Rises. So it had been a very long time. And not to mention, the Batman hadn't got a solo movie for a long time. Batman vs. Superman was the closest thing we got to a solo movie. Ben Affleck's Batman didn't get a solo movie because a bunch of stuff happened in the DCU. I wish he would have gotten one, but he didn't. Not to mention, a lot of people doubted Robert Pattinson could be a good Batman. Obviously, Robert Pattinson said he wasn't working out for this, but what he was really trying to say was that he wasn't about to juice up for this role like most people do in Hollywood. Because Robert Pattinson is a model, and I don't think he needs to get juiced up on, that chemical X just to play Batman. And Batman in the comics himself is very against juicing, and, in a sense, he kind of stays true to Batman. And then the Batman trailer came out. That Batman trailer was a masterpiece. It's crazy to say a trailer is a masterpiece, but that trailer did everything to hype up the movie perfectly. That Batman trailer was perfect. I remember watching it every single day because of how hype it just made me feel. And a lot of people love that trailer. If you go on YouTube, you can see people getting millions of views from just reacting to the Batman trailer alone. So the Batman movie was filled with both doubt and hype. So people were highly anticipating this Batman movie. Could this Batman movie be good? Could this Batman movie be what everyone wants it to be? And then it came out. Everyone doubted the Riddler, but the Riddler was a perfect villain to Batman. This was one of the first true Batman movies where he takes center stage. The music was amazing. The shots were amazing. The costume was amazing. Everything looked great in this movie. The whole city looked lifelike. This was one of the few Gothams that truly felt like Gotham City. We had an amazing car chase, which I consider one of the best car chases in all of movie history. And to me, this might be an unpopular opinion, but this is my favorite Batman movie. I consider this better than The Dark Knight, and I know this is a very unpopular opinion, but I love this movie. I think Riddler is a perfect villain for our time, with serial killers being so much popular nowadays. And you get to see Riddler without the mask, and you see the serial killer is just a kind of a loser, which is kind of true for real serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer and all these other serial killers that are popular nowadays. And I will probably make a whole video about the Riddler, but the Riddler is perfect. The Riddler was so perfectly done, so perfectly changed for the modern era. This movie was perfect. And obviously the ending was a little bit weird, but besides that, this movie was perfect in every single way. And this is just the start to the Batman. This is the first movie in the trilogy, or however long this movie series goes, but this was a perfect start to the Batman. In the early 2000s, spy movies were taken over by one guy, a guy named Jason Bourne. Jason Bourne had a chokehold on spy movies for a while in the 2000s, and he was all the rage. Jason Bourne kind of took a backseat because his last movie wasn't too well received and kind of left a sour taste in people's mouths. So Jason Bourne was kind of on a downhill slope. And then we got announced Casino Royale, the next James Bond movie. Now, obviously there was some doubt if James Bond could be as good as he used to be. And not to mention they got a new actor to play Jason Bond. And being the next Jason Bond is pretty crazy. It comes with a bunch of expectations, and we didn't know Daniel Craig could really embody Jason Bond. And in my opinion, if Casino Royale wasn't as good as it was, would have been as much of an icon as he was back in the day if this movie didn't do so well. But when that movie came out, amazing. Jason Bond had never been perfect. So much of these scenes were perfect for James Bond. We don't even get to know his backstory as a James Bond. We get it thrown into the story. It's such a great story, such a great villain. The only hint of backstory we see is just backstory given to us by another person interpreting who James Bond is. They made James Bond such a real spy. Everything about this was amazing. Action was amazing. The parkour in the beginning was amazing. The intro scene was amazing. Everything about this movie was amazing. Also, the editing of this movie was amazing. How the timeline was a bit disrupted in the movie, but you were still able to comprehend the movie. If you haven't watched James Bond, I know there's a lot of people who don't watch James Bond, who are younger, like myself, and who have never watched a James Bond movie. Go watch Casino Royale as one of your first James Bond movies, and you'll see the hype. Because this movie, one of the most perfect spy movies we have ever gotten. In my personal opinion, probably the best James Bond of all time. Not to mention Daniel Craig was amazing in this movie.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Next up is Star Wars. Star Wars is an icon in media, but there was a point when we only had the Star Wars original trilogy. That's all we had for Star Wars. The prequels weren't out, the sequels weren't out. All we had was the original trilogy, and a lot of the story was up in the air for the past until the prequels came out. The first one, Phantom Menace, was a huge global phenomenon, making $1 billion, even though it wasn't that great of a movie. So it making $1 billion was pretty amazing off of the fact alone it was the prequels to Star Wars. But the first one kind of left a disdain in people's mouths because even though it made $1 billion, it wasn't as great as the original trilogy movies were. It felt more of like a fan service movie to see all these Star Wars back in action and see them have all these great fights. And, you know, I have one lightsaber, but not two lightsabers. Obviously, I'm a Star Wars fan. I love this movie. I even have a Darth Maul lightsaber, but this movie was not great at all. Then Attack of the Clones came out, had some amazing sequences, but wasn't amazing either. So entering the third movie of the trilogy, the doubts started settling in if George Lucas can make a good Star Wars movie like he did in the original trilogy. But people still love Star Wars. People still had hope for Star Wars for it to be great. So the third movie was George Lucas' final chance for the prequels to see if he can still make a great movie like he did in the original trilogy. Then in May 19, 2005, we got the answer to that question. With this movie, George Lucas did the impossible. The first two movies weren't amazing, had a bunch of flaws, but the third one really perfected what George Lucas wanted to do. I feel like all the actors were finally had reached their peak. Obviously, in the last two movies, the actors in the movies weren't the best, but the third one, I'm not saying they're perfect either, but they did an amazing job. The chemistry felt way more real, but the story was amazing. The action was amazing. Some of these shots still amazing to this day, and we got so much iconic scenes in this one movie. The squid opera scene, one of the most creative ways to tell a story, and just an amazing visual while we see these two iconic characters, Anakin Skywalker and Emperor Palpatine, finally get a one-on-one full conversation. We get to see the fall of Anakin, really putting his story into wrap on how he becomes the tragic Darth Vader. We get to see Obi-Wan and Anakin finally face off, what feels like two brothers having to make the ultimate sacrifice on taking out one of their best friends that they hold cherishly for what it seems their whole entire life. Anakin sees Obi-Wan as his older brother, while Obi-Wan sees Anakin as his little brother that he was told to take care of. Ultimately ends off in one of the best Star Wars fights of all time. The choreography in this movie, amazing. Order 66, amazing. And now even more amazing with all the animated series and all the other TV shows really fleshing out this scene. Hayden Christensen, not a perfect actor, but delivering some of the best lines in Star Wars history. A couple of my favorite lines of his are, "If you're not with me, then you are my enemy." Obviously a very famous line from one of our former presidents. This movie is filled with very good political commentary. This movie is just amazing. Obviously a lot of people like to say it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously there's still a lot of people who hate the prequels, and I'm not too big of a fan for the first two, but I do think Revenge of the Sith is one of the best things Star Wars has ever made. It's just an amazing movie with amazing fight scenes and amazing commentary and so many great scenes that it's hard to deny how great this movie is, even if you're a hater. And the last movie that lived up to crazy expectations is Logan. At this time, Wolverine hadn't had a solo movie for a bit. He was in some good X-Men movies, but his solo movies weren't doing so hot. His first solo movie was bad in all aspects of being bad, and the second one was alright with a few good scenes in it. And for one of the most iconic superheroes of all time in Marvel's original Big Three, Wolverine definitely deserved better movies than this. And in 2017, we really got to see Wolverine's best movie, and the movie he definitely deserved, Logan. It's crazy to think Hugh Jackman's Wolverine's best movie came at the tail end of his career, where we see Wolverine old, the world is in ruins, Wolverine is tired, we get to see a Charles Xavier who's suffering from medical problems, but the true heart of this movie is Wolverine's daughter, X-23. This dynamic duo where we get to see Wolverine, one of the most cold-hearted characters in all of history, and especially comic history. Seeing him have to take over a child is amazing. We get to see this once cold-hearted superhero, this battle-toughened, gone-through-wars hero, have to take care of a child that he kind of doesn't want to take care of. At the start, he's only taking care of her for the money, and then we get to see him go through a slow process of maybe he could have a good life. His whole entire life of years of living has been battle, has been loss of loved ones, has been his brothers dying, his friends dying, his love interest dying, to where all he cares about is just being free from it all. He just wants to get on a boat and be with Charles Xavier. And at one point in this movie, he gets that final chance to finally be free when he's in the house of strangers. And he really feels like he could be a family with this girl and Charles Xavier. And then it gets taken from him by his past in a sense. And it's all stripped away from him. All the love he could have had, all the good life he could have had, all the great people he just met in this one moment, stripped away from him. And then we get to see one of the craziest sequences of Wolverine when he goes through the forest. We get amazing action sequences. We get to see Wolverine and X-23 team up in the forest to defeat young Wolverine. But at the very end, Wolverine dies, laid to rest, never to be seen again, as X-23 lives off to hopefully have a better life than Wolverine ever did. Now, this movie is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. Probably one of my favorite movies of all time in general. It perfectly does Old Man Logan while doing the X-23 movie. They do so many plot lines in this movie, but they do it so well. Making it rated R just makes it 10 times better. One of the few comic book movies we actually get to see rated R. And it was a perfect send-off to one of the most iconic characters in cinema history, Wolverine. And I know they're bringing him back for Deadpool 3, but Hugh Jackman even knows himself, this is kind of more like of a side story. He even says himself that Wolverine died in Logan, not interfering with the original timeline and the original story, because he himself knows Logan was a perfect send-off. Now let me know what you guys think of my 5 movies that lived up to the hype. Obviously there's so many other movies that I could have talked about. Let me know down in the comments if you guys think these movies lived up to the hype, and let me know some other movies that you personally think lived up to your hype. Obviously this is my list and it's not perfect, but these are some movies that I consider great and lived up to the hype. Because sometimes we set crazy expectations on movies and most of the time they can't meet them. But when they do, those movies become very special in all of our hearts. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The least you can do is like and subscribe. Hope to see you guys next time. Later, hater. Peace.